So the session today is called Stop the Stress Cycle. And our subtitle there, Building Pauses into Your Routine. I'm Hayley Watts. I'm joined by Francis, who's part of our HQ team. Francis will be monitoring the chat, and please do head to the Q&A to post any questions that you have, because we'll come to those towards the end. We're due to finish at 1:45 today. If we don't get around to answering all of your questions, and with over 300 people on the session today, it's quite possible we won't get to everybody's questions. Then we will be posting the answers to your questions on our social media platform on LinkedIn in the coming days and weeks. But hopefully we're going to aim to answer as many of your questions as possible. So let's crack on. We're here to talk about stress, which can feel quite negative. We need a certain amount of stress to get us motivated, to get us out of bed in the morning, but we don't want stress to become problematic for us. So we're going to start to think about what that looks like in terms of it not becoming problematic. We want it to be something that helps us. So thank you for joining us. Some of you I know are big long-term fans of Think Productive. Some of you may be joining us for the first time today. We're a global training company thinking about how we improve the world of work. Originally delivering training around productivity and well-being. We now have almost 40 workshops crossing kind of leadership, management, self-development, whole range of things that are going to help you to be able to do your jobs more effectively. We're a global organisation, and we deliver our workshops I only deliver them in English, but I have colleagues who deliver them in other languages too. In terms of our time together today, I won't be monitoring the chat, so if you do have a question, please put your question into the Q&A. My colleague Francis will be heading into the chat to pull out any kinds of comments as we have time for those, and we want to make the session interactive today. That's how we tend to work. If you're finding the chat distracting, because it's a large session today, there's lots of you here, please feel free to not look at the chat and to just look at the pictures that we're sharing and to listen to the thoughts and the ideas. The important thing is that you have some actions to take away that you can implement starting at 2:45 this afternoon. Graham Alcott is the founder at Think Productive. He's written a book called How to Be a Productivity Ninja. And I think there's a risk of productivity becoming a bit of a dirty word, as people kind of think, oh, productivity is just about getting more done. But that's not our approach at Think Productive. Our approach at Think Productive is bringing well-being and productivity together, because actually, if we're looking after ourselves and our well-being is in a good place, we're going to make better decisions about the work that we do. We're going to make better choices throughout the day, and it's all going to feel a bit easier. And we're going to know we're focusing on moving the right things forward rather than just moving stuff forward and taking action for the sake of taking action. So that's our starting point in relation to all of our productivity and wellbeing workshops. My colleague Grace writes in her book Struggle, the truth is we're all on the brink of unknown territory. We live in an age of change where uncertainty is the new normal. Like, there's so many things going on in the world right now that we don't know about, and so much change has happened in recent, I was going to say years, but months, in terms of how we work. And that pace of change is getting faster and faster. And the only thing we can be certain of is that things are going to change in the future. And sometimes our brains don't like change. Sometimes people think, oh, that's new and different. Eek, I don't like it. And that can lead us perhaps to feel a little stressed sometimes. In Grace's book, In Struggle, she talks about how we use those difficult times, those difficult moments, as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow, and perhaps create something new and better as we go forward. But when I say, we're talking about change, people tend to look a little panicked. And that's because the wiring in our brain is unhelpful. Let me tell you a little story. I want you to imagine we're back in caveman times, And today I need to go out this afternoon, and in order to feed my family, I need to find 10, 12 carrots. Each time I find a carrot, I get a little, some endorphins go off in my brain. I'm getting those feel-good hormones. I'm like, yes, I'm making progress. I've got my carrots. And I've got all my 12 carrots, and I'm heading back to my cave. And then I come across this tiger. I'm looking at him or her here. Like, that's a beautiful picture of a tiger. But I don't want to get up close to it. Right, the carrots become much less important. My brain wants me to, quite rightly, focus on the danger in front of me, and the positive things that have been happening are of no interest now. We just need to get away from this tiger. We can go and get more carrots later or tomorrow, or maybe come back for these carrots if we're able to do that. But the carrots become much less important. They fade into the background, and our brain focuses and concentrates on the tiger, because that's the thing that's presenting a danger to us. How this shows up now in our working lives. You may have been in a meeting recently where somebody said something that you didn't like or you didn't agree with, or maybe they criticised you or gave you some feedback that wasn't well received. And those things stand out for us much more than all the nice, positive things our colleagues might say about us. I know someone who was delivering a training workshop. There are 100 people, and one of them wrote something really negative in their feedback. And she went into a bit of a panic and a spiral around that. We can turn that round. We can think about that as a learning opportunity. What do I do differently next time? But the response in the moment was to panic, to ignore all the 99 positive comments and focus on the one negative thing. And I think that's one of the things that can also make our brains feel stressed, feeling overloaded. This is a slide that always goes down in some of our productivity workshops very well. And I would love you to head to the chat and tell me, how do you think this person is feeling? Aside from feeling really quite sticky, how do we think they might be feeling right now? Yeah, frazzled, overwhelmed, indecisive, anxious. They can't breathe, they're paralyzed, there's too much, they feel stressed, not happy. They want to go home and get under the duvet, says Claire. Yeah, absolutely. We can feel stressed, we can feel overloaded, we can feel overwhelmed. There's lots of things that can help us to do something about that. When our brains are feeling overloaded and overwhelmed, it's not a nice feeling, and we can just sometimes want to go and hide under the duvet. We can sometimes just want to take that break. We've gotten here, take a break. That feels like a nice, easy thing to do, doesn't it? One of the things that we help individuals and teams with is that sense of feeling overwhelmed, overloaded. There's too much to do. One of the things I often hear people say at the end of some of our productivity workshops is, oh, that was good. Amazing what happens when you take the time out to think. We've got into a situation, I think, in a lot of workplaces where we're just trying to do stuff, and time to think can become quite scarce. I love this quote from Rachel Barr. I will read it out for you. The more drained our emotional cup is, the more inclined we are to try refilling it with the things that drain it even more. The example that Rachel gives in her book in relation to this is, you've had a tough day, you go home, you sit on the sofa, maybe you grab a bag of crisps or a glass of wine, you sit and doom scroll for a bit. You haven't really achieved very much, and it doesn't make you feel any better. It makes you feel even more or just as drained as you did before. But actually, if we're looking after our well-being and we're just feeling that little bit better, and our emotional cup has a bit more in it to pour from, we might say, well, actually, I know that if I have a piece of fruit now, or if I do a bit of exercise, or I meet up with a friend and have a chat, I'm going to feel better. And when our cup isn't emptying, it becomes easier to make choices that will help to fill up our emotional cup. And I'm really interested in that in terms of how we think about how we manage our stress. Sometimes thinking about, well, actually, when I know I'm feeling a bit low, my emotional cup is empty, I've had a stressful day, sometimes planning in advance what those things are that we're going to do to help bring out our emotional cup a little bit fuller and fill us up a bit more. If we can plan those things in advance, it becomes much easier to do them at that point where our emotional cup is feeling low or empty. We need a break, and you know that, I know that. Doesn't mean we always do it, right? Our human rhythms are, we're human. Very often in workshops, we'll talk about, what are the times of the day where your energy and your focus is at the best, and what are the times of the day where it's lowest. And it's not uncommon for somebody to say to me, well, mine are at the best at, I don't know, whatever time they're at the best at. How do I keep that all day? And the answer is you can't keep that all day. You're not a robot, you're a human being, and your energy levels go up and down throughout the day. For me, the time for me to do my most effective work is first thing in the morning. I know that around 3:30, 4 o'clock, I find it much harder to focus. We'll talk in a minute about what I do about that. One of the things Grace talks about in her struggle book is this story about bread and how the process of making bread, since that's been industrialized, results in there being a lot less nutrients in the bread, from the types of grain that botanists use to the increased number of pesticides that need to be used on that particular grain, which reduces the nutrients in the soil, and the roots aren't as long, they don't go down as deep to where the nutrients are. So in our grain, there's less nutrients. The milling process has changed so that it strips out more of the nutrients from the wheat that we use. The baking process, the proving of the bread, is done much more quickly than it used to be. Again, reducing the amount of nutrients, making it more difficult for us to digest. And I'm telling you about this thing about bread because each stage of the process, something has happened to try and make the process more efficient. But we've lost something from doing that. And I think in the world of work, we value ticking things off the list. We value doing stuff over perhaps the thinking about the stuff, over making decisions about what we do. It's very often people talk to me in workshops about, oh, there's ad hoc requests, there's things where people just come along and ask me to do something, try and get those done straight away. But then by the end of the day, I realise I haven't done any of my own work. So they're trying to be more efficient, but they're not moving forward on the things that matter most to them. So trying to get that balance right in today's fast-paced world of work can feel really quite difficult. And one of the things that we can do to try and help us with that is to pause more often. I've got 3 types of pauses that I'd like to talk to you about. And then I'm just going to ask you to head to the chat and perhaps share an example of one of the pauses that you find helpful. So firstly, there's the micro pause. I've needed a few micro pauses myself this morning. I'm going through the process of buying and selling a home in the UK, and that, particularly today, feels quite stressful. I received an email that I didn't really like, the content of the email, and I paused, I took a deep breath, and instead of firing off my maybe less polite response as what was going through my head, that okay, try and understand where the other person is coming from. What is it they need to know? What is it that they want to hear? What is it that they want that they're not getting from the process at the moment? By taking some deep breaths and just spending a few moments thinking about it from someone else's point of view, I was able to respond in a more positive way. That might show up for you if you're in a meeting with a colleague and somebody says something you kind of disagree, and you're tempted to say, hold on, I disagree, or you're wrong. By taking a micro pause and asking a question to find out more about that person's perspective and what they're looking for or what they're trying to achieve, that helps you to understand more. You might then say, well, I've got a slightly different view. Could I share it? And you share your thing. Those examples are both micro pauses that relate to other people. It's not always other people that's the problem. Sometimes it's our brain feeling overwhelmed, like the person with the post-it notes on their face earlier. Sometimes it's our brain responding to that tiger and taking much more notice of the negative over the positive. So recognizing when those things are happening and taking a little pause and saying, okay, what can I do now that's going to help me to feel differently about this. Maybe taking a step back, getting some, just a few moments sometimes to take a deep breath and to think about it differently. I have quite a lot of daily pauses in my day. I think the one people traditionally think about is the lunch break. But I just mentioned kind of around 3:30, 4 o'clock, that's when my energy levels are a bit lower in the afternoon. So what I usually do is I usually take a break around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's just 5 or 10 minutes. I might play with the dog. I might empty the dishwasher. My son comes home from school around that time, so it's nice to be around to kind of say hi to him and dispense a snack perhaps. Maybe I try and get some movement. My friend Mel gets her hula hoop out, and that's part of her daily pause, is to kind of just do a few moments of exercise. It might be going for a walk. That helps to minimize perhaps the impact of my daily lull. But it also means I'm taking a break. It's not a long break, it's 5 or 10 minutes. I'm getting some movement in there, and that's helpful. Sometimes I might just take a 5-minute break to unload the dishwasher, particularly if I've got something where I'm thinking, oh, I've got to make a decision. I've got to think this through. I'm not sure what my response to that email or Teams message is going to be. So I might just, rather than responding or sitting at my desk and moving on to the next thing, take a few moments to pause and think about that. Maybe even do a little bit of journaling about it. My weekly pause, now that tends to be maybe the weekend. I also do a weekly review. In my weekly review, I'm looking back at what happened in the last week. Have I got any actions to follow up? But what did I learn about last week? How's my mental health? How's my well-being? How am I doing? Are there any changes I want to make this week? I have a whole checklist for going through my weekly review. And for me, that's a really important weekly pause that helps to reduce that sense of feeling stressed and overwhelmed. Some of you might be working across time zones, and that can be difficult in terms of getting your weekly pauses, because it means you don't maybe have as much time off in the evening. A friend of mine shared the other week, so I can't finish work before like 7 or 8 o'clock on a Friday because my colleagues in the US would think I was knocking off early, even though I've been at my desk since 8 a.m. UK time. So she's now decided she's going to take a little bit of time out on a morning, once or maybe even twice a week, to just go and do half an hour in the gym or half an hour in the swimming pool. And that gives her a little pause, which means she comes back feeling more energized and able to deal with working different hours that look different to a 9 till 5, or perhaps, yeah, she has to just be more flexible because of those working hours and those time zone differences. So thinking about, what do you do each week that gives you a bit more energy? It might be that you have a weekly pause to do a yoga class. It might be that you have a weekly pause to do your review, whatever feels like it's going to be useful for you. And I would love to hear some examples in the chat of some of those micro, daily and weekly pauses. Oh yeah, some discussion going on there about what's a good amount of time for a lunch break. Dog walks, park run, lovely. Walking home from the office. Yeah, even if you're working from home, going for a walk at the end of the day, in order to have a bit of switching off. Yeah, power nap, love it, Anna. Yeah, some fans there of the weekly review as well. Any favourites for you, Francis?
Julie shared that they find the inability to create daily pauses is a symptom of overload, which makes
Absolutely.
absolute sense.
Yeah.
Not getting the daily pauses adds to the stress and it starts a spiral.
Yeah. And I think when you're noticing you're not getting the daily pauses that are helpful for you, very often we can feel like I've just got to keep going. But when you're feeling, oh, I can't take a pause, that's probably the time at which you most need one. So maybe that's not a 60-minute lunch break, but maybe that's making sure you grab some lunch away from your desk, even if that's just, I don't know, doing some star jumps or dancing to your favorite tune in the kitchen for a few minutes. They might be shorter than the kind of breaks that you're used to taking or that you would ideally want to take. But I think that really helps to recognize I don't feel I can take a break. This means that's the time I really need to. Oh, Charlie's liking some music for 10 minutes. That's cool. Marie's taking an
Helen is,
afternoon nap.
yes, Helen has also shared listening to music, closing eyes, and concentrating on breathing. They tend to do it between meetings, and it's been a great micropause.
Yeah. Pausing between meetings is also really helpful. And some of our meetings courses, we talk about the importance of maybe not starting the meeting on the hour, maybe starting at 5 past or 10 past to give people a little pause, a little break between their meetings. But I mustn't digress and go into meeting stuff. So we fuel ourselves in different ways, right? So sleep, hugely important. Creating some good habits around sleep. That's one of our daily pauses that hopefully we are all taking and getting a good amount of sleep. Nutrition, Graham, who I mentioned earlier as the founder at Think Productive, has also written a book with a nutritionalist called How to Have the Energy. And in that book, they talk about the importance of eating the rainbow. We know that fruit and vegetables are different colours because they have different nutrients in them. So if we can eat a wider variety of colours, we're getting a wider variety of nutrients, and that's going to be good for us. So we want to do more of that. Thinking about the types of food that you eat. If you're having a big bowl of pasta at lunchtime, you're probably going to feel quite tired in the afternoon. So thinking about how we use nutrition to help us fuel us. And I remember being at the book launch for How to Have the Energy, and Graham kept saying, "We're not saying you can't eat cake, you can still eat cake." So we're not talking about going on a really strict diet or anything like that. We're just encouraging you to make good choices, drinking lots of water and all that kind of stuff that we know is good for us. But when we feel stressed, it can become harder to do that. We've talked a bit about movement already. I've got my standing desk here. I don't know that I could just spend the time walking. Might experiment for a moment. Yeah, I'm finding that distracting already. But thinking, how do you build a bit of movement into your day? Maybe that's the mock commute to or from work. Maybe that's taking some daily pauses to go for a walk. Maybe your movement looks like something else. A friend of mine does a 10-mile run to feel more energized. That would not have an energizing effect for me. And these don't have to be big like workouts of 60, 90 minutes. This could just be walking from A to B, getting off the tube a stop earlier, or off the train or the bus a stop earlier, parking a little bit further away from where you need to go to make sure you get some steps and a little walk in. We all know the stuff around putting our own oxygen masks on first, but that doesn't mean that we do it. So I just wanted to use this as a little opportunity as a reminder for that. If we need to look after ourselves first before we can look after other people. So thinking about what does that look like for you today, tomorrow, in the next week? It's one of those things that people say. It's easy to say, it's difficult to do sometimes. So I want you to just spend a moment thinking about what does that mean for you? This quote from Ariana Huffington. And I don't know if anybody's heard Ariana Huffington speak. I heard her speak at an event some years ago, and she talked about her experience and why she talks about mental health and well-being and why that's her focus now. She actually passed out from exhaustion at her desk twice. Like that's really extreme. None of us want to be at a point where you're sat at your desk and you pass out because you're so exhausted. And that's not a good place to be at. And those kind of things, that level of exhaustion can creep up on us. If we're saying, actually, I'm really stressed, I'm too stressed to take a break, I'm too stressed to take my daily, weekly, and micro pauses, that's when you start to get into a position where you're thinking, oh, I need to take some time off. I'm stressed. I'm too overwhelmed. We want to try and avoid that happening. I love that, Lee. Mental fuel, definitely getting completely away from the digital and out into nature. And we know that when we're out in nature, the research tells us we we come up with more ideas. We can think more creatively. when we're in a natural environment. So thinking about that deep fuel, what is it that you do that helps you feel energized? And we've got some lovely examples there in the chat in relation to those pause questions. But let's stop feeling guilty or feeling that we can't prioritize those things, because they're the things that help us to make good decisions, help us to stay focused, and stop our natural levels of stress becoming a problem. One of the other things we talk about at Think Productive is this idea of everyday mindfulness, the pauses in the day that give us a few moments to be mindful. Someone brought me for Christmas a 100 Days of Drawing book, and it's got like some little pictures and doodles, and that encourages you to do your own. I was doing a bit of that this morning while I was chatting to my son at breakfast, and yeah, I was decorating teacups. I don't have any particular artistic talent, but it felt nice. It felt nice and mindful. So thinking about what that looks like for you. While you're taking part in the session today, maybe have a little bit of a doodle. There's research that suggests kind of when you're doodling in a meeting, it means you're taking on more information. You're more likely to be able to retain some of that information.
We
Yeah,
already
Rachel
have a
sharing.
few.
Yeah. And Rachel's just sharing there. I have a gazillion tabs open in my brain. Yeah. So Rachel, you're right, journaling might potentially help with that. And I know that a lot of the stuff that we help people with in terms of productivity and systems for their workflow can be really helpful to people who are experiencing ADHD. Katie's doing her cross stitching while she's listening. That's cool. Love it. So we're not generally fans of multitasking at Think Productive, but that cross stitching, if you're good at it, probably doesn't require you to make decisions, to think, to read and write while you're listening. So that definitely feels different. Sometimes this is about getting perspective, taking a step back, perhaps thinking, okay, I'm upset about this now, or I'm finding this difficult now, but tomorrow or next week or next month, I'm going to get through this, and this is going to be something I barely even remember. So that can sometimes help us. Sometimes thinking about it from someone else's perspective is useful as well. One of the things that we don't do so as often as I think we should, and we definitely don't do it when we're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, is to celebrate the small successes. So we might celebrate the big successes, I don't know, publishing a book, getting a new job. We might celebrate those things, but celebrating the small wins as well is really important. And that might just be with a smile, congratulating yourself, ticking it off your to-do list. Maybe giving yourself a high five in the mirror, taking just a few moments, that micro pause to celebrate, like, yes, been doing something well, something has gone well for me, and congratulating ourselves around that. We can spend so much more time beating ourselves up about what we haven't done, and we forget to celebrate the successes. That's the tiger and carrots thing again, right? I love that. Nicola's writing 3 things I'm grateful for every night. And yeah, gratitude and journaling, to-do lists, these are all things that help us with that. And I think we're much more aware of that now than we used to be. I'm just wanting to give you a little reminder to be doing that regularly. So it's time for you to get into some action planning, and then we'll move into some questions. So if you have got a question, please post that in the Q&A section. Francis, if you could get ready, thinking about what some of those questions are. Just going to give you a couple of moments to share in the chat, to jot down somewhere where you're going to be able to come back to it later. What are you taking away from our conversation so far? What's your action plan looking like? Laura's using the 6-minute diary. I'm intrigued by that. Haven't come across that before, but I'm going to be looking it up. We've got a few people who are journaling regularly. Oh, Lucy's touched on something really important here, not feeling guilty about taking breaks. That's so important. Prioritizing exercise. Prioritizing fresh air. Yes. Mini pauses. Fresh air. Perspective. Recognize when I'm spiraling. Yeah, recognizing that you're doing it and then changing your behavior. Yeah, nice.
Naomi is interested in the weekly review you mentioned earlier. Hayley, what categories or template do we use?
Yeah, so we when we're talking about the weekly review, we tend to think about like, where does all your work come from? What are all the different sources of work? And capturing from each of those sources, what are the things that I need to do? Then perhaps making some decisions around priorities. So one of the things I always do when I'm talking to people about doing that weekly review or talking people or doing a weekly review with people, I'm thinking about what are the priorities. Also, what am I not going to do? Looking through the calendar a few weeks in advance, looking behind. We have lots of checklists on our website, and I'm trying to think. Yes, I'm pretty sure there are some examples of that on our website. If not, I'm sure we'll be able to add some. There are lots of examples of weekly reviews and the types of questions that you might ask. I know I've seen stuff on there before. Yeah, there are some weekly review sessions on the YouTube Think Productive channel as well. So that would take you through in a lot more detail what the weekly review is about. I think myself and my colleague Lee have both done a few of those over the years. Finding the joy, yes. Okie dokie. Right, a couple of things to talk to you about before we head into the Q&A. We've just scratched the surface. I've given you some very quick thoughts and ideas there. Hopefully they've got you thinking about what's going on in your action plan. Most of the things I've talked about in our time together today come from our How to Be a Productivity Ninja session. That one is for anybody who's feeling overwhelmed, feeling like there's too much work, not enough time to do it in. We go into organizations and deliver these sessions in-house. With the How to Be Productivity Ninja session, we're working with your real life workload. We're not talking about case studies and hypothetical, what would you do ifs. We're working with your stuff and we're making it feel less stressful, less overwhelming, and giving you tools to move forward. We do a shorter session called Human Not Superhero, and that session is a lot of the stuff we've talked about today about fueling, about the importance of breaks, some of the things I've talked about in relation to struggle. Grace's book, Grace does a whole session on struggle as well, but you'll also find some of those examples in Human Not Superhero. So if you would like us to come into your workplace and deliver some of these sessions for you and your colleagues, do please get in touch. We have a price increase coming up in April. So to help make your training budget go as far as possible, or perhaps you need to spend your training budget by the end of March, do please get in touch so we can help you and come in and do some of these sessions with you and your team. Having these conversations with the people that you work with really helps to create a bit more momentum perhaps in a team. For people who find external accountability useful, that can be good as well. You can contact me. I'm Hayley at thinkproductive.co.uk. I'm going to pause the recording in a few moments and I'm going to give you a little opportunity to win a free place to our public workshop, which is coming up on the 4th and 5th of March. That How to Be a Productivity Ninja session is an all-day session when we do it in person. But in order to kind of look after our well-being when we do it online, it's 2 half days. So if you are not part of a bigger organization, if you've got a really small team, or perhaps you're a solo worker, you might want to sign up to our How to Be a Productivity Ninja workshop in March. Really looking forward to that. I think I'm running that one. So that's going to be exciting. If you wanted to book in a place on that, you get a 10% discount just for being on the webinar today. We're going to head to your questions, and then I'll explain what you need to do with my email address if you'd like to win a free place on the public workshop. So Francis, we've had some interesting questions, I'm hoping.
Yes, and the first one comes from Anonymous. I think people wear a busyness badge with pride, like they are far too important to rest. How can I show others that taking a break is a bigger flex?
Brilliant question, and I completely agree with you. Um, People say, "Oh, I'm so busy. I can't possibly do that. I'm a really busy person." And often when people are busy being busy, it doesn't mean they're busy working on the right things, the things that are going to make the most impact. So I think it's really important if you're in a leadership role in an organization to be leading from for example, and taking breaks, encouraging other people to do that. You don't have to be in a leadership role in an organization to be able to say to someone, it doesn't seem like you're taking a lunch break today. Are you going to do that? And just reminding people, actually, when we take breaks, we do become more effective. If we don't take a break, we become tired, we're more likely to make mistakes. The work feels harder. So I think encouraging you to talk about the benefits of taking breaks. And if the culture is that you don't take breaks, like really challenging that, because that's not really working for anyone. And if that doesn't work, or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can still take a break. There's another question here from Candice about whether the recording will be available. That will be added to our YouTube channel over the next couple of days, I believe.
We have one from the chat coming from Faith. How much would you say is wise or sensible to take as breaks? I don't want to take the mickey, but no, I do need them.
Yeah, that's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question, right? I think that will depend on all sorts of things. Yeah, I mean, it's good practice to at least maybe take I would say for me, I try and take kind of a 5 or 10 minute break in the morning. Sometimes I like to start work quite early. I started work at about 7 this morning, and then I took a little bit of a break later on. Um, and that just works for me, but not everybody has the flexibility to be able to do that. So I think finding a rhythm that works for you, experiment, do different things. If you're doing a full day's work, and you're taking a break every half an hour for 5 minutes, like doing that Pomodoro technique, then that might work. If you're doing an hour's work and 2 hours break, that's probably too much. So thinking about how that works for you. I know Elena, who's our managing director at Think Productive, she writes a lot about the importance of taking breaks, and who's just shared something there in the chat around that as well to add. I love what Catherine's just shared as well. You don't have to be sat at your computer to work. I had some decisions. I was really struggling with prioritizing something the other day, and I was like, right, I'm going to take the dog for a walk while I think about this. And that gave me the clarity that I needed, which was super helpful.
Dosia has their hand up. If you could if you have a question, you can place it in the Q&A. Oh, okay. We have another question coming from Julie. I've been trying to prioritize and be honest, realistic with my time, but this has been met very poorly by colleagues. Do you have advice on how to gain support on managing your stress when it goes against your team culture?
Oh, that's a tricky one. And I think when people say things like, I haven't got time, I sometimes notice people kind of bristle a bit at that, like, well, I'm doing it, I've got time. I think the question to ask is, what's the priority here? We know we haven't got time to do absolutely everything we want to do. You've just asked me to do these three things. I just want to get an understanding about which of those three is the priority. Um, or if I'm going to do this thing you've just asked me to do, what do we put on a back burner? What takes less priority now in order for me to be able to focus on and to do that? I hope that helps. I'm aware we've got quite a few questions coming through. We'll take one more question, then I'll explain what you need to do to be entered into the draw to get a free place on the How to Be a Productivity Ninja workshop. And then maybe we'll do a little bit of After Dark and we'll stay and answer any further questions.
Okay, that question will come from Lucy from the chat. What's your advice when you hit an afternoon slump, but you're still struggling with energy even after taking a break?
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe the break isn't the right thing to be bringing your energy levels back up, but maybe you're also being a bit hard on yourself and expecting yourself to have your very best levels of energy and focus after a break, um, because that won't last as long. So for me, I've already shared like I'm at my best in the morning. I then take a lunch break. I'll do a bit more work and then I'll take a break at 3 in the afternoon. But I know my energy levels will go down quicker in the afternoon than in the morning because I'm not a robot. I can only focus and have that really good energy for a certain amount of time. So I would say think about what you're eating, making sure you're drinking lots of water, just thinking about what are you doing in the break. Um, and if you're still kind of feeling, oh, I've not got as much energy as I should, maybe that's time to deploy a bit of self-kindness, and recognize that maybe if that particular time of the day where after a break you're still not feeling energized, maybe that's just not your best time of the day. You might want to start thinking about what types of activities you do in that time of the day. Like, what are the easy things that you could do? I'm going to come back to your questions because I can see there's lots of great questions there in the Q&A, and I'm sure there's some in the chat as well. But we said we were finishing at 2:45. So a couple of things to share with you. It'd be great to connect with you on LinkedIn. I would love to hear your experiences about pauses and breaks and what you're doing to help manage your stress levels. So thank you all very much. I hope to see you on a Think Productive session soon.